Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Dellera, and we are once again brought to you by our good friends at Rhythm. Rhythm is the #1 AI betting tool in the market, and you can get a free trial right down here in the bio. You can create your own models, you can create your own projections, and whatever you think is important, you can include in the model, and they worry about all the math and the actual modeling on the back end. And you can backtrack it, see how your model would perform, and decide whether or not it actually is a profitable model, or maybe you need to reassess and tinker a little bit. So it's all fun, and it can help you be a better bettor on a daily basis. And again, you get a free week on me with the link down below in the bio. And if you like it, come back. Got another 25% off for your first month. So guys, this episode is going to be a little bit different. I normally record a little bit later, but I wanted to make sure that I could watch the Mavericks and the Lakers. I wanted to see Luka's first game against the Dallas Mavericks after the trade. So I'm recording it a little bit earlier. Some of the numbers, I don't have as many player props that I normally have, but what I am going to do is I'm going to be able to talk and just give you a lot of the angles that I'm maybe looking for in a lot of these games. So that way you can get them a little bit earlier. And we'll be sure to get this episode up maybe a little bit earlier as well. So it's going to be interesting. We're going to be able to get a couple different things tackled here. We do have some spreads. We do have some ideas for this slate, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're just going to get right to it. So the first game that we have is the Philadelphia 76ers against the New York Knicks. And obviously, you guys know I love everything about the New York Knicks. But the biggest news here is the Joel Embiid situation. So Joel Embiid was already ruled out for this game. They are looking into whether or not they are going to essentially do another surgery for him if they need to go through some other option. And I think this is a particularly interesting situation for the Sixers and Joel Embiid because their pick, they should tank, honestly. Their pick is top 6 protected, and right now they have a decent chance to get into the top of the lottery. This is a loaded draft class, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense to have Joel Embiid stress his leg out anymore in what's almost a lot like a lost year right now. So I think that they should really be saying, let's try to do whatever we can, get him healthy. And that's been Joel's commentary as well. It's like he wants to be healthy, he wants to go on a playoff run. And it begs a couple of questions, right? It begs the question of whether or not they should just say, all right, well, we're going to move on from this season. Sure. I think it also begs the question of how they should build the team. Who are you constructing the team around? Because as great as Joel Embiid is, when Joel is healthy, he is a clear top 2 or 3, maybe I'd say at least top 5 player in the NBA when he's healthy. And the problem has been he hasn't really been that healthy aside from the year that he really won MVP. So if you look at that, if you consider this, how do you want to construct this team? Who do you want to build the team around? Are you going to build the team around Joel, or are you going to try to retool around Maxey, and then maybe whoever you draft, you're going to try to see how that fits in with that kind of construct of the team, like Maxey and Jared McCain, because McCain's been awesome too. So it's a very interesting situation. Then in this particular matchup, Yabusele also has been ruled out. Kyle Lowry's been out. We're looking at a 10-point spread. Eric Gordon, he's getting a surgery. So that kind of indicates a little bit of this kind of a move towards a tank, right? Then you have this matchup against the New York Knicks, who really need the win. OG Anunoby's probable. Mitchell Robinson, they already ruled him out for this game, and Karl Anthony Towns is listed as questionable. As soon as they open up a line, I'm going to be all over Josh Hart, rebounds and assists, and I'm going to want triple-double in this spot. No Yabusele, so I think that helps us on the rebounds and the rebound spot for Philadelphia, right? And then obviously, Cat should probably sit. Cat should probably not play this game. New York can win this game without him. Philadelphia is just down pretty bad right now in terms of what their personnel is. So I'm going to be all over Hart. That's kind of what I wanted to see. And what I want to see where this line is. If it's 13.5, 14.5, maybe even 15.5, I'm going to want it. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for him against Philly. And he kind of always plays pretty well against Philly as well. So I'm going to like that, and that's one of the angles that I'm going to want for this game. Looking at the next game on the slate, we have the Raptors versus the Pacers. It is a back-to-back for the Raptors. Pacers should really be able to handle this Toronto team. I'm going to be looking at really one of the issues, though, for Indiana is they just listed Tyrese Halliburton on the injury report. Halliburton is listed as questionable due to left groin soreness. So that's going to be something you have to keep your eye out on. TJ McConnell also is listed as questionable for this game. So obviously, if neither of them are able to go, we're going to be looking at Nembhard assists. Mathurin points is probably going to be good. And for we're also going to probably be looking at Pascal Siakam points against his former team. So I think, some of these guys always like to get up in that situation. And for Toronto, it'll be interesting to see if Emmanuel Quickley plays both ends of the back-to-back. He was absolute cheeks today, and we'll see whether or not they are going to be missing anybody else. So in the first game of the back-to-back, they lost to the Boston Celtics. Jakob Poeltl didn't play, and Brandon Ingram still, we don't know when he's going to come back, but it's not going to be for a little bit, probably another couple weeks. But we'll see if Jakob Poeltl is able to play. If Poeltl is able to play, it's definitely a great matchup for him against this Indiana interior, who has kind of gotten cooked on the interior. They give up a lot of looks at the rim, give up a lot of paint points, and Poeltl, lives and breathes there. So it's just a matter of, is he going to play? And he would be one of the guys that has fresh legs for Toronto, given the fact that he sat out on Tuesday night against the Boston Celtics. Next game on the slate, we have the Portland Trailblazers are 5.5-point road favorites against the Washington Wizards. I'm going to tell you something. The Wizards are absolute ass. They're not a good basketball team right now. But this does open a couple spots for us from a player prop perspective. Donovan Clingan, I would think, should have a really good game. I think that he has a great opportunity here. The matchup, I think, is good against Washington, who obviously is a little bit undersized, not undersized, but they don't have anybody of his size. Clingan's a little bit more traditional big, whereas Washington, you're looking at Alex Sarr on that side of the ball. Has been really interesting lately because his minutes are just a little bit all over the place. When we look at his last, say, 10 games, some of them are at 7. We're looking at a couple about 16, a couple in the 20s. There's one game of 31 against Denver. It's very hard to pin down exactly how many minutes he's going to play. And his rebounds line is, say, at 10.5. He's hit this in 2 of his last 5 games, right? 20 against Denver, 13 against Utah. And if we look back over the last 10, he's only he barely hit 7. He's only had 7 twice. So while I think this is a really good matchup for him, I really just have no idea what Portland is doing with their rotations, with their lineups, and it makes it very, very difficult to bet on them. I will say one player that I'm curious about is Deni Avdija. Avdija obviously played for the Wizards for his whole career, right? And he was traded here to Portland. This is his first game against Washington. I don't really think that it's a revenge spot, but I do think it's a spot where, maybe you get up a little bit more against your former team. So his points line is at 17.5, and his assist line's at 3.5, 4.5. I would be pretty interested in the assist line here. His potentials have been good. He's at 7.5, 7.7-ish over his last 10 games. So I think that's definitely a look. And you can maybe combine it into a little bit of a PRA at 29.5. He's hit this in 3 of his last 5 games. His minutes have just been fluctuating, and that's kind of what the problem is with a lot of these players on the Portland Trailblazers. You're seeing them play 40 minutes one game, 20 minutes another game, 30 minutes another game. So it's a very difficult situation to be in. It's very difficult to bet on these teams. And honestly, it might just be a spot where you stay away or you try to target spots live, like some of those live player props where it's so-and-so to assist to so-and-so or so-and-so to score on this type of play at this point in time. So that's maybe one of the angles you could look at for that game. Then we have the Celtics versus the Pistons. Celtics are 4-point favorites. I'm very curious about Boston's injury report, right? Because Boston they took care of Toronto. It was a little bit of a tighter game than they probably would have expected. Didn't play Al Horford due to a toe injury. Drew Holiday was resting. Luke Cornett was out for personal reasons. Kristaps Porzingis appeared during shoot-around, was warming up, and then all of a sudden was sick. I don't know what that means. I think there's so many issues with the NBA injury report and the way the reporting is done. I don't know if he's going to play against the Detroit Pistons. On the flip side, when you look at Detroit, they obviously have a rest advantage, and they also might have a personnel advantage if Boston is down to all, like, and doesn't have some of these players. If they don't have Horford, if they don't have Kornet, if they don't have Porzingis. So that's something that we need to consider. I think that Tatum, RA would probably be good in this spot. Jaylen Brown has been really good in back-to-backs in terms of his scoring, probably about like 20 and a half or so. Cade Cunningham has also been fantastic for Detroit. So that's definitely something I would look at. Maybe a little bit of Jaren Duren rebounds here. I do have some concerns from a foul perspective, whether or not he's going to be able to hold up in this game, because the biggest thing with Duren is he going to get in foul trouble? And I'm curious to see where Malik Beasley's three-point line is set at. He has been right on this number. We keep getting it about 3.5, and we keep getting the points line about 14.5, 15.5. I like both. Another reason to like this, though, is that Simone Fontecchio, he is questionable for this game with a finger injury. If he can't play, then that's definitely something else to kind of consider. It's another little boost for Malik Beasley, and that's one of the spots that I'm going to be looking at. Next on the slate, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder versus the Brooklyn Nets. Thunder, massive favorites. They're coming off that ugly loss to the Minnesota Timberwolves. They probably should take care of business against Brooklyn here. The problem is Brooklyn kind of plays at a slow pace. I think it's going to be hard to cover this number, like, honestly, like, regardless. If anything, I might be looking at a Nets team total under. It's still going to be a tough sledding for Brooklyn. Nick Claxton is suspended for this game, so that's going to hurt their defense. I think that maybe you could look at like the Thunder to score 100 in the first three quarters. I like that bet in some of these spots where teams could really blow the other team out. Oklahoma City tends to play normal rotations for the first like three quarters of a game. The one thing that I think is odd and is kind of scaring me off of Oklahoma City lately, or like now anyway, in the game that they just played against Minnesota, they ran like a totally different rotation. And it was like out of nowhere, where Shea normally plays the entire first quarter. Instead, he played like 6 minutes, came out, went back in, and played most of the second quarter, which is not what he does. So really, really odd, really interesting to see what's going on with them. And this is also their third game in 4 nights. So it's a road game. Always got to be a little bit concerned about covering big numbers in that spot, even though it's a clear bounce back opportunity here for them. Next, we have the Atlanta Hawks against the Miami Heat. These two teams just played the other day, and we just saw this matchup. So whenever these two teams kind of play, or whenever you see teams play like this in these back-to-back spots, it gets a little bit wonky. Atlanta won 98-86. The biggest thing is that Miami has kind of struggled to find like a real like identity, or so to speak, in some of these spots. And when we look at this last game against them, they just couldn't get the ball. They just couldn't get scoring. And that's obviously a major problem for Miami, where they're kind of like running through some of these options. The team isn't that good, honestly, right now. Andrew Wiggins led all scorers with 23 points. He was 4 for 9 from beyond the arc. I think that Tyler Hero has a pretty big bounce back game. I'm curious. Let me look and see if his lines are up yet. So Hero's lines are up. His points line is high. It's at 26.5. He just scored 11 last game against Atlanta. But look, at the end of the day, he took 19 shots. That is so many shots. And when he's been hotter, he actually takes more. So the prior game against Milwaukee, he was 12 for 27. Prior game against Toronto, 10 for 18. And then against Dallas, he was 15 for 30. So he's a little bit variable. He's a little bit hot and cold. But I do think that there's a good opportunity here for Hero to kind of have a bounce back spot. Atlanta's defense is not particularly good. The problem is that you do get a little bit of treatment from Dyson Daniels. However, he has been relatively successful in this spot. He had 28 points in the December matchup and 33 in the matchup before that. So even though he just had 11 last game, I do think there's enough volume here where we could see a little bit of a bounce back opportunity. When he actually took more shots than he did against Atlanta back in December, where he was 8 for 15 from the field, but he did take 8 free throws in that game. So he did get a little bit more opportunities at the charity stripe. Wouldn't surprise me, wouldn't shock me to see Hero have another big game and go over the spot. The rebounds have been good too, so I don't mind adding, like the PR instead here. but the assists really came down last game. He only had 3. Definitely something he could do, but I definitely, it's definitely going to be a little bit of a tougher matchup. One of the spots, though, Dyson Daniels has been really good rebounding the basketball against Miami. He had 11 yesterday, 2 days ago, and then he had 7 and 6 in his other matchups against Miami. And all of those matchups, he played about 30 minutes over the past couple of seasons. So 5.5 rebounds, not too bad of a look for Dyson Daniels. And then Trae Young has rebounded the ball decently well against Miami. I think in part it has to do with just some of the stylistic things that Miami likes to do. And his assist line is at 10.5, just had 14. He's been really good against Miami recently as well. 14, 15, 13, 11 over the past couple of games. So see where his is at. See if it's 13.5. That's not bad at all. See about his assist line. See about double-double. Any of those could be great opportunities for Trae Young in this spot against the Miami Heat. Then we have the Clippers versus the Bulls. Curious to see if Vucevic is able to play. He missed the game the other day. Let me pull up the injury report again real quick. We are looking at, for LA, Norman Powell already out. Oh, I had a thought about this, so I'll come back to that. And then for Chicago, Vucevic doubtful against the Clippers. Dosunmu listed as questionable. Kevin Huerter is probable. Zach Collins is probable. Josh Giddey has been incredible rebounding the basketball. Definitely something we have to look out for. And then I would also be looking out for the Clippers. I'd be looking for Zoo. I would be looking at some of his peak points or his rebounds in this particular matchup. The thing that I want to talk about with the Clippers is Norman Powell. So Norman Powell has been one of the players that has been involved in the most improved player conversation. And if we pull up I'm going to pull up the current odds. So if we pull up the current odds, he's second really to Cade Cunningham, right? And what I think is particularly interesting about this spot is that most improved player is subject to the 65 game minimum. Cade Cunningham is all the way out at minus 300 at Caesars right now, but there is a minus 165 at BetMGM. I think that that's actionable at this point to a degree. I would maybe use it as a builder piece for some of these futures. Cade should hit the 65 game minimum, obviously barring a major injury here. The thing that I'm interested to see is if Norm is ineligible. I think it's better in a way if Norm is ineligible for the award than if he just misses. I think it's going to create some opportunity further down the board. Tyler Hero is second, or really third in odds. He's at 22-1. Trey Murphy's at 35-1, but I think he's missed too many games. I don't even think he's eligible. Dyson Daniels 100-1. Evan Mobley 60-1. Men Thompson 75-1, 80-1. Christian Brown 80-1. And then obviously our guy J-Dub is at 100-1. I think this is a particularly interesting spot for this award, because I just genuinely struggle with the concept of giving most improved player to a number one pick. Cade Cunningham is supposed to be incredible. And I get that the leap is maybe more significant because he's going from star to, or all-star to superstar, or whatever, or really good player to all-star, whatever kind of criteria you want to give it, right? I still really struggle with the idea of giving it to a number one overall pick. Think that because I think Norman Powell is the guy that I would normally want to give this award to. He's a little bit of an older player, quote unquote older player, and he's somebody that I think I would want to target for this. The growth has been significant and the scoring jump has been huge, right? Probably could have been or should have been an all-star. Looking at the rest of the board though, Tyler Hero has taken a noticeable jump. Trey Murphy, I don't think he's going to wind up being eligible because he's going to miss too many games. Dyson Daniels has been incredible. I don't think he should win Defensive Player of the Year, but I do think that this jump could be maybe where they look for it. Even Evan Mobley, I have similar issues with Cade, but he wasn't the number one overall pick, so I think I can let it slide a little bit more. Amen Thompson, I think, is too young. Christian Brown makes a lot of sense. The numbers are awesome. Starting for the Denver Nuggets, huge uptick in his role, going from playing behind KCP as a primary bench guy to being a primary starter for this team. 80-1, I think, could be worth a shot. And then if you probably already have a Jalen Williams ticket, but I don't mind even sprinkling a little bit extra on there. I think that if Norm is out, I don't feel like it's going to be a straight consensus Cade Cunningham most improved player. I think that there are going to be people down ballot that make sense, and I feel like there will be a faction of the media that coalesces around one of them. I don't think that it's going to be, they're not going to make this a one-man race. It's not going to be like Cade is just winning this award. I think it's different than DPOY. Victor was just a clear favorite. Everybody was like, we want to give it to him. We think he's the best player defensively that we've ever seen. He's incredible, yada, yada, yada. I think that people feel that Cade is extremely good. He took a huge leap. But I also think that when we look at what the voters can kind of look at, if Norm is out, there's a lot of long shots down the board. And the way that this board kind of looks, I think a lot of it has to do with action. I think a lot of it has to do with handle. And I do think that they're going to coalesce around somebody else. So Tyler Hero at 22-1, I don't mind. And then if I had to go further down, I'd be looking at Christian Brown at 80-1, and then maybe even Jalen Williams at 100-1. So that was my thought on most improved player, and the fact that Norm is getting real close. I think he can only miss another like 4 games, and then he's ineligible for this award. And with him being a little bit of an older player, the Clippers obviously trying to make some sort of run, it wouldn't shock me if he misses a little bit more time here and just tries to stay healthy, tries to make it to the playoffs, tries to make it on a, on a really good run as they continue the season. Looking at the Kings versus the Jazz are 8.5-point home underdogs. And I'd be looking at Isaiah Collier over 8.5 dimes. That I think is out there right now. It's tough. I'm fetching lines. A lot of these are from Underdog, which is always just like the fakest book in the world. I have some thoughts about that too. And one of the other spots is that Sabonis kind of struggles in this matchup. While we have to always watch out for the Jazz injury report. So if we look at Utah's injury report, they have listed as Walker Kessler as questionable for this game. Lauri Markkanen is out. John Collins is out. Colin Sexton is out. And they are also in the tank fest right now. I'm curious to know if Walker Kessler plays. He's the key to really this entire thing with Sabonis, because Sabonis in his matchups against Kessler, he struggled like relatively to what he normally does. And he averages only 12 rebounds a game against Kessler. But when we're seeing lines at like 13.5, 14.5, it's something you have to watch for. The other thing is for the Kings, Keon Ellis is questionable for this game. Maybe he plays, maybe he doesn't. But I think that might actually help our Collier assist bet here. So he had a down game last time out where he really only was able to he only got 4 assists against the Blazers. But prior to that, he's just been absolutely cruising with over 8.5 in 8 of his last 10 games, averaging 9.6 over that stretch. So I'm going to be looking at Collier over 8.5 assists in this game. And then the final game on the slate is Spurs versus Rockets. Spurs are on the second night of a back-to-back here. The Rockets, I would imagine, can take care of business. Rockets are also on a back-to-back, and I think it's particularly interesting because the Rockets, well, let's go over these injury reports. Wemby's obviously continuing to be out. We'll see if they sit anybody else in this matchup against Houston. And then for Houston, Fred VanVleet sat in Tuesday's game, even though he was upgraded to like questionable. They thought he might make his return. I would imagine that he comes back for this game against the Spurs. I also think that since Tari Eason started, Tari Eason probably doesn't play. I think that we're going to see a little bit of staggering here. While people might look at this and say, all right, well, like Amen Thompson is somebody that maybe he gets his minutes cut. I really struggle to see that happening. With Fred VanVleet back, I want to talk about some of the movement in the stats for these teams, right? So one of the websites that I really like to use a lot, and I'm using it right now. So one of the websites that I like to use a lot is PvP Stats, and you can kind of it's a little bit like confusing at first. It took me a little bit of time to figure out exactly how to use it, but you can kind of check and see what players do, like with players, without players. You can see how their stats change, how they move, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the spots that I'm looking at right now is points per 100 possessions with and without Fred VanVleet. One of the biggest swings is, honestly, there aren't a ton of huge swings that are better with Fred VanVleet. Tari Eason's a bit better, but nothing super. On the flip side, we're going to see some other players perform worse. Jock Landale sees a dip, but not a lot of minutes there. Cam Whitmore sees a dip. Dylan Brooks sees a little bit of a dip. Alperen Şengün sees a dip. Doesn't really impact the scoring a ton. One of the things that it is impacting, though, is some of the assist stats. And Amen Thompson sees a pretty significant dip in his assists. With Fred VanVleet, he's averaging only 3.8 assists per 100 compared to 6.6 without Fred VanVleet. So if I was looking at one of those props, I'd be concerned about that. Jalen Green, similar, 3.8 to 5.7 without Fred VanVleet. So those are two players that are probably going to be negatively impacted from a usage perspective. I don't know how many minutes VanVleet's going to play. I would imagine it's not a full minutes load in his return, but he does help kind of stabilize this team, and he doesn't need the ball a ton, but it's just enough to kind of take this out. It's going to take a little bit of time for Houston to adjust to some of the spacing things, adjust to life with Fred VanVleet again, and I think that he's going to come back for this game against the Spurs. I did just want to touch on this real quick because I just saw some props pop up for the Clippers in the Clippers game against Chicago, and we're seeing Zoo at 13.5 rebounds. I'm gonna like that, honestly, in this spot against Chicago, where Vucevic is listed as doubtful. I'm also looking at Josh Giddey. Josh Giddey's rebounds lines at 8.5. He had what was it, 17, 18, 16 last game against Philly. So his last couple games are 16, 8, and 16. He's just been absolutely cruising, like I said, when we look at some of the injuries that they're dealing with, particularly to Io being out has been big for him. So have to keep an eye on whether Dosunmu is going to play. He's listed as questionable for this spot. This is still a tough game for Chicago, though. The Clippers have one of the best defenses in the NBA. So going to be keeping an eye out on that. James Harden has also been excellent against Chicago. He's basically had double-digit assists in 1, 2, was this 8 games in a row, 9 games in a row? So Harden assists is definitely going to be something that we look for in this spot. Under on his points in pretty much every single game. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out for as well. But without Norman Powell, he probably does see a little bit of an uptick in scoring, but I don't think that much. 26.5 is a monster number for James Harden. So I'd almost be looking at under 26.5 points, over 8.5 assists for James Harden in this game. So that's my breakdown for the Wednesday slate. A little bit of talk on most improved player. I'm going to be doing a variety of different shows coming up over the next couple of days. Tonight, Wednesday night, I'm recording a show with Brian Fonseca. We're going to be talking about a little bit of sports betting in general. We're going to be talking a little bit about the the market and how that moves. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the space and, gambling Twitter, some of the things that you see out there. So be sure to tune in for that. And then obviously on Thursday, I'm going to be doing Coast to Coast live with Andrew O'Connor Watts, which is also presented by Rhythm. I did open up a little bit of question to my Discord, The Huddle. So be sure to join. Got a link down here. You guys can hop in for a little bit of a discount. And somebody asked me a question. They said, I wanted to get some advice on how to withdraw without getting limited. General rule of thumb on how much and how often. I don't know if it totally matters. I also think that I wouldn't leave my entire bankroll in a book. I like to leave some of it, right? I like to be able to get liquid. I want liquidity in case I want to bet something news related, right? I don't really think it matters too much on moving the money around. I do think it matters if you're sending it to PayPal or Venmo because it triggers a taxable event. Sometimes it'll trigger a reporting requirement. So definitely would be cautious about that. I don't really think it matters all that much. I do think that it could if anything, you could have your account maybe flagged for moving money around maybe a little bit too much, if it's literally every time you bet. But I also know that there's people that literally withdraw every time they take a bet, every time they win a bet, and they just want their accounts zeroed out. And then whenever they go and they want to bet, they deposit into the book and then they make the bet. So I don't really think it makes a huge difference. I do think that it could flag you for some tax purposes, and that's not legal advice. That's just me saying what some of the requirements are for PayPal and Venmo. If you're using those services, it could also, depending on your bank, it could flag it for a transaction. So that might be one of the issues that you could run into. So that I would just keep an eye out for that. For pods and recs, I am going to recommend, oh man, I got a fence today. So that was awesome. It's like a dog park for like in my house. It's fantastic. I've never had a fence before. So this is awesome. Dogs are super happy. I don't know if I'm going to recommend getting a fence because I think it's not exactly like a cheap thing to do, but definitely recommend taking your dogs to the dog park. The weather's getting a little bit warmer. They've probably been cooped up to a certain degree. You're not wanting to stand out there in the cold as much, but definitely take your dogs to go run. It's a blast, and it's always fun to just watch them. I feel like they always just have a great time, and it's nice to see them happy as the weather gets warmer. The other thing that I'm going to recommend is I'm trying to make my own like pickled onions. So this is almost like a request. If anybody has a good like method for doing that, please advise. I think it would be awesome. I feel like they're I always forget that like you can pickle stuff. Like you don't have to just buy pickles, like the traditional pickle. You could you could pickle your own pickles, but you can also pickle like anything. I feel like onions are a pretty versatile thing. You use it for breakfast, you put it on a sandwich, put it on a taco. So definitely something that I'm trying to work with, trying to learn. It's like a new little thing. And so I'm going to recommend that. And the other thing is I'm going to recommend, like, if you have, obviously most of you have Twitter, I would say, but Grok is like kind of like ChatGPT, Grok. I think they're kind of awesome. And I know that people kind of hate on these things sometimes, but I think if you use them properly, it can really save you a shitload of time, and it can save you a ton of effort, ton of energy. And it's really just about not like using it to do your work, but using it to like make your life a little bit easier. And it's not like just saying, oh, well, do this, write this paper for me. But it's a little bit more about saying like, if you need to gather some information quickly or learn about an idea fast, then it can kind of spit it out to you. It's a slightly different version of Google because it's a little bit more interactive, right? If you have a question, you type it into Google, sometimes you get a million websites and it's not super helpful. Whereas if you use the AI, it can kind of help you find a little bit more clarity, find a little bit more of an angle there for you. So definitely interesting, definitely something to kind of consider, and would use it. I would recommend. I have had some success with it. I have found success with some recipes, stuff like that. And, you can just ask it kind of anything and see what it spits out. So that's what I'm going to go with. And speaking of AI, our number one AI betting tool is Rhythm. And you can get Rhythm for a week for free or get 25% off your first month with the link in the bio. We appreciate them sponsoring this show. We appreciate you, the listeners, and they are going to help you get a free trial and get your bets, get your models so that you can continue to cash that.